Music brings us together, even when we're apart. That's why we support Canadian musicians, festivals, and award shows. It's just one of the ways TD's Ready commitment helps build a more inclusive tomorrow.
Yes, a huge thanks to TD and all of our sponsors and partners for this session and for the festival season. The month of June has been a special month, a month of celebration, but also a month of reflection. The month of June is Pride Month. The month of June is African American Music Appreciation Month. And the month of June is National Indigenous History Month. And on that note, I'd like to take a few moments to recognize the land from which we present this evening. It is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. And at this time, we would also like to take a moment of silence and reflection for all of the souls of the recently discovered unmarked graves here in Canada and for all of the lost lives of the children as well. Thank you. Thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Juliette Dunn, and I'm the Executive Director, Co-Creator, and Artistic Producer of the 8th Annual TD Niagara Jazz Festival. And you'll often see me presenting the shows, but tonight I'm going to step away from the mic and from the camera, and happy to do so to bring on one of my dear friends, Ms. Barbara, aka Babs, Worthy. Babs is a creative writer and producer, actress, and a woman of many hats, and she has worked with so many of the arts organizations here in Niagara and beyond. To name a few, the Shaw Festival, Music Niagara, the Niagara-on-the-Lake Historical Museum, Brock University, Niagara College, and the list goes on and on. If you work in the arts here in Niagara, you cannot not know the infamous Babs, as I like to call her. She's also a dear friend and has been with the festival since its inception in 2014. With the festival, Babs has worn many of her hats. She's assisted with writing and producing, directing our youth, and so much more. And this year, she is my other half for our large productions, the Emancipation Day Weekend and Picnic, and also our Niagara's online Summer Mardi Gras. And as you know, tonight is a Mardi Gras session. And with Babs's rich history in history itself and also in the history of Niagara-on-the-Lake, it just made sense for her to come on and take you through this journey with Witchdoctor Utu and exploring the culture of New Orleans and voodoo. So I'm just thrilled to present to you my friend Babs, and a friend of the festivals and a friend of yours, I'm sure. Here she is. Take it away, Babs.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Juliet. Babs Worthy here, and I'm really pleased to have this opportunity to interview Witchdoctor Utu today. Here he is. Hey there.
Hey, bonjour. How you doing?
Bonjour. Good. Ça va? Très bien. Très bien. And hot. Très bien.
Yes.
It's
Il fait chaud.
hot. Good thing we're not in British Columbia.
Right.
So where am I speaking to you? Where are you right now?
Well, I'm right here in St. Catharines, Ontario, and I'm talking to you from my little hut that is called the Niagara Voodoo Shrine. So I have a little place here in St. Catharines that is completely dedicated to the spiritual legacies and lore of the Underground Railroad, in so much of the alternative spirituality associated with it. When most people think of the Underground Railroad, there's of course the spirituals and the very overt Christian part to it, but there were a lot of people who were freedom seekers and abolitionist supporters who were immersed in all sorts of mysticism, the best term for it, as well as various spiritualities that are called conjure, rootwork, spiritualism. So my little house here is dedicated to the memory of those who were part of that fabric of the Underground Railroad. And since here in St. Catharines,
I was going to get down to that, but absolutely, I've just finished reading your book.
Oh, wonderful! Thank you so much.
Absolutely, and I'm a student of Black history, and I think of myself as that, and feel really attached to the history and moved by it. But I have to say, reading your book, well, it left me breathless with awe about her. I actually found myself weeping at times. She came to life for me in a way that I know I've read about her and I've used her in my own docs. But honestly, you just gave her such life. And I was so astonished at how I reacted to it. It really, I was breathless. So
Well, I appreciate that a lot. It's in order to bring forth a book of that nature, you couldn't really sugarcoat anything. Reality had to be reality. And so some of it had to evoke a little bit of emotion. I've heard that before, which, I guess that's a good thing. A lot of people have mentioned the emotional reaction it causes, but it's a very intense subject. And, but I also wanted to make sure that highlighted that, those attributes of Harriet Tubman, especially her mystic side.
Well, that's the side that I knew nothing at all about, and it's not talked about. And I know that you are aware of that too, so completely. And this is what your book has really brought out. It's not mentioned in too many places. So here we go. I mean, what do other students of Harriet Tubman and descendants of all those freedom seekers, how do they react to this coming out? Is this a secret or is this well known?
I would say it's safe to say that it's well known. I've been lucky enough to meet members of Harriet Tubman's, there's two different arms of her family that exist to this day that were related to her brother and sister. And so I've met some of those people over the years. And when it comes to freedom seekers here, and especially specifically Niagara, quite a few of the descendants are good friends of mine, colleagues, even contributors to my book as far as information goes. So it's not a secret. Her mystic side is very well entrenched in academia. It's just that it's a type of subject that isn't really something people like to talk about. The Underground Railroad has a presence and a vision of, peaceful, the helpless, escaped slave being helped by the great white, abolitionists. And to some degree, some of that is true, but it sort of diminishes to me the honor and the strength of the freedom seeker, because most of them did not have people helping them. They had to do that journey alone, and they drew upon any measure of spiritual or magical formula they could in order to survive such an ordeal of sometimes up to a year and a half on the run in remote hostile locations. And so, it's just not a subject, voodoo, root work, mysticism. Academia doesn't want to talk about that at the best of times, let alone implementing it into elements of the Underground Railroad. So that's...
I'm going to come back to that. I'd like to come back to that, especially root work and some of the mysticism. But I'm going to put up in the chat here the title of your book so people can see it, which is Conjuring Harriet, Mama Moses Tubman and the Spirits of the Underground Railroad. And you can access this book through Amazon and Goodreads, and it's up there, and it's extremely easy to access. So I urge anyone who's interested, and it's there in the chat. But let's hit on that. Let's go back to that root work. What is that?
Well, it's African based. So in order to start to talk about root work or conjure, we do, have to remember, and I suppose there's people that don't think about this, but the only reason that we had freedom seekers in the Americas in the first place is because they were brought here against their will through the slave trade. And, the colonizer slavers were smart to some degree that, West Africa, where a majority of the prisoners came to be enslaved, in Nigeria alone, I belong to a religion that's centered out of Nigeria. There's, dozens of languages spoken. So, when people think of West Africa, I think as one big, sort of homogenized region, but really it was multiple cultures, multiple religions, although there were similarities to some of the religions. And so the slave masters split them up, especially in the Caribbean and other locations, South America, split them up so they couldn't talk to each other. And so what root work and voodoo and what people commonly know as Santeria is the African clinging to their ancestral religions, their ancestral reverence towards their traditions, their ancestors, and trying to cling to it, and the pragmatic aspect of it being healing and trying to heal and through plants and medicine growing in the ground. So it became a framework of how the African had to assemble remnants of where to remember where they came from. And to this day, for anyone who's immersed in Black culture or Black communities, you notice that there's still a difference in the way the Black church is.
Sure.
Black celebrations are Canadian or American or Caribbean. There's a very zest for celebration and for family and connection. So, this was how they clung to this types of things. And then eventually, because of Christianity or Catholicism being, put on top of them to be the dominant religion, they were able to glean that there was parts of the Bible and parts of the mysteries of the saints, if they were Catholic, to have similarities to their elevated beings and their elevated gods and ancestors. And so they were able to put together something that now became a foundation of a type of unique American. When I say America, I'm always referring to, South America, the Caribbean, and to some degree Canada. It's North America.
Yeah.
It's for them to have something that now resembled like a framework for them to, empower themselves while being enslaved, or empower themselves while escaping or fighting. Something else that not people realize is just how many times revolts and uprisings did happen. And
holding on to what as you described it, their religion, their voodoo or their beliefs, is what we will have to understand is truly a way of life. It's not like a cult. It's not like anything. The misconceptions of the word are so, that's why we have to demystify it. I think it's just, as I understand it, they came across, as you said so rightly, they were divided up by their slave masters. How did they hold on to those various beliefs? There's so many religious beliefs, or their voodoo or their spiritual beliefs. How did they manage to do that? Was it very oral? Was it through music and singing?
Very much oral, absolutely, passed on. It is a testament to the will of those strong people to maintain that, because it was illegal. They tried to punish them, for practicing anything like that. Now, again, it's a little different in the United States, where there was the Protestant religion, which was a very different construct over where the way things were approached by the Catholic colonizers. So there's a little slight difference there in the way that the cultures were and the way they, utilized their enslaved people. So just ultimately they would never bow down. They would just always found a way to adapt and survive. And that's the ultimate gift of what we call like voodoo and Santeria. These fall under a terminology called the African traditional religions.
Right.
So that's the ones of here in the Americas.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what the gift and beauty of that is. And anyone who is not, descended from people of that culture, you're expected to be in and be blessed to know that you are, contributing or benefiting mostly from that framework of, empowerment, the freedom, blessings, healing. And it's a very beautiful expression. The word voodoo itself is, it literally means spirit. And so it means spirit. And it doesn't describe all the African traditional religions. They're all very different traditions, but there is nothing nefarious. Hollywood wasn't very good to witches either. And now Wicca, as we know it, is essentially something, forgive the colloquialism, soccer mom, accessible. So people now can go to shops and New Age shops and they say, oh, I'm practicing Wicca, or I'm utilizing elements of modern witchcraft. It doesn't really mean much to anyone anymore. And I think now that, time has, traveled a bit, it's becoming the same way for African traditional religions. People are starting to realize that, some of the things that Hollywood has done is
You've dropped in lots of wonderful little tidbits there. I'd like to go back to one of the ones you said about you have a religion in Nigeria. How did you come to these traditions, or how did they come to you?
Well, it is definitely not normal. So I imagine that quite often when people see me speaking on behalf of the religions I belong to, the first thing they're thinking is, okay, what? And I understand it because, I was born, of all places, I was born in Scotland. But I grew up here in Canada for the most part. I lived for a little while abroad, but I also, spent a great deal of time in the United States in most of my adult life. Only reason I had already been since a young man involved in what I was mentioning earlier as Wicca, the neo-pagan religions. But I was also a drummer. And I descended from a family of drummers. So my ability and my talent to be a drummer, specifically on hand drums, tribal drums, which was something I really loved in the 90s. I'm an older guy. So it was literally just that alone that I, in around 1999, eventually sort of just collided with people of those traditions and cultures who, pre-internet really, as far as everyone having it at least, and a necessity for, when there's ceremonies in some of these traditions, it's very community based. There's drumming, singing, dancing, if it's done, in a certain way for a certain purpose. And so drums are essential. And I was invited to, add my drum. And I also had a couple of friends that were from different nationalities, Trinidad and Tobago. And we began to be well known as these guys who had the talent and also the types of drums. I got a house full of these types of drums that are necessary for certain traditions. And so it just became this way where, and again, it surprised me how inclusive these religions are. And that's the one thing I think a lot of people forget is if you just aren't perpetrating to be something that you're not, they've always been that way. That's the African traditional religions, especially the ones centered out of the Caribbean, are very cosmopolitan, and they have been since, the emancipation in those islands, and then the indentured servants and the formerly enslaved formed a society where there's a lot of exchange.
Do you not think that your whole background in paganism and Wicca, that really it reflects into this? I mean, the music, the Celtic festivals are wild, which I adore, the Celtic wild music festivals. For me, it's very similar to what I hear you talking about. And it seems like it's the same passions and the same movement towards the spiritual, through music.
Yeah, if you in Europe, or I'll just use Scottish culture for sure. If you look at the Highland games, Highland traditions, Highland celebrations, especially in Scotland, it doesn't take long till you sort of just peel back a few things to realize that there's still a great deal of reverence and connection to the ancient pagan celebrations. And so there's a great deal of similarity for sure in almost any culture that's got a sense of animism, sacred ritualistic music, which is almost always going to be rhythmic to some degree. And so that's how I ended up in those traditions, was simply because I was a drummer.
Describe sacred animism for the uninitiated.
Well, animism just meaning that, that there's, a power and a spirit within animals, plants, bodies of water, that spirit is sort of something that's on the other side can inhabit, and we can utilize those things, for exchange of energy and empowerment and connection to the earth. There's a lot of levels to that.
And that seems to be what we really showed that was in Harriet, how Harriet really employed all of that. Would you say that when you say the word conjure, so someone like me hears the word conjure, and conjure, magic, believe, but also make believe as well as to believe. Can you tell me the difference?
Well, conjure, the word obviously has many meanings depending on how it's used, but it's a euphemism that came out of Black America that specifically meant to conjure the root. And the root, not just meaning the root of certain plants that have sacred or medicinal or magical qualities, which of course the African would learn from the Native American First Nations, the people who were here, who are also suffering to colonialism and invasion, but also so they could know which plants had the ethnobotany that was necessary. But the root is euphemism for the soul. So to conjure the spirit, to conjure to conjure your soul, your power. And one of the things is there's a great deal of commercialization now in root work and hoodoo and conjure. It seems like it's kind of being very, to be honest, quite whitewashed. Mm-hmm. And so, but people forget that all of the African traditional religions are by foundation and rooted in fighting oppression by those who were oppressed and being enslaved. And so all of it is about empowerment, survival, and somehow, somewhere in there, celebrating the sacred things on the other side, and exalting the sacred elevated beings that can bestow blessings on humans.
And what is the difference between voodoo and hoodoo?
Well, there's a great deal of many opinions on that, but it's safe to say that when I say voodoo, I'm referring to more something community oriented, something that's more associated with the Catholic colonizers, meaning there was many saints, many ways that the Catholic, the French, the Spanish, Portuguese, the ways that they sort of had their colonies run, left them a little more isolated, the populations of those enslaved. So there was an ability to drum, there was an ability to dance when you weren't being worked to death. And of course, voodoo was the basis of the Haitian Revolution that became for them to finally get their autonomy from France. They fought for it, and voodoo was the primary source of power behind that, which is why they have that euphemism in Haiti today. Haiti is 90% Catholic and 100% voodoo, right? It's just that it depends on who you're asking and when you're asking. Now, hoodoo is something uniquely United States America, because the Protestant form of, unless you were in Louisiana is different. It was the Catholic outcrop, and so things were very similar in Louisiana as there was in the Caribbean, whether it be food, culture, architecture. And with the rest of America, it was very Protestant, very much under a different, stricter foundation. And so plantations weren't as big. People were the enslaved were working in homes, smaller communities, I suppose. And so hoodoo is a terminology kind of referred to for the singular practitioner, somebody who was a person by themselves who knew how to take certain roots, certain incantations, certain blessings, mostly out of the Psalms of the Bible, and give that to a person to help, get good luck, have stamina, avoid being captured, so it's a bit more sorcery oriented, personal sorcery, shamanistic, you could say. And voodoo, while it does possess all those, voodoo is much more about a religious connection, drumming, dancing, community oriented,
Yes.
so that's a very easy way, a very basic description of the two.
That's good. I like it. The comparison to the Catholicism and ritual is very real. I was raised a Catholic. I'm not one now, full transparency, but I was certainly raised one. And I did always like, and I think maybe because I'm in theater, I do like ritual. I do like the ritual of it. Here's a question though. Her omens, her dreams, her warnings that you talk about in your book, in this wonderful book. How much of that is documented? How do we know about that?
A great deal of it was documented by several historians while she was alive, many interviews by the descendants or the freedom seekers that were living in St. Catharines. Thomas Garrett, one of the most famous abolitionists, in his interviews, shortly after the American Civil War is when people started to sort of document what had happened up to that. And the Underground Railroad, it took a long time for it to really become something that was written about as much. And by all of the famous people that were the rich, influential, never mind her own quotations, because she had two biographies written about her by people interviewing her, and all of the people. So they just went to be able to research this. So it's and in fact, Thomas Garrett famously said that to leave out any of the elements of her unique mysticism would be, a tragedy on her legacy, because it was such a part of her narrative. And then even to this day, one of the foremost scholars of Harriet Tubman, Dr. Kate Clifford Larson, who lives out in Maryland, even she, as a person who does not subscribe and like to put any effort or any light towards any of the things I'm talking about, and I've met Clifford Larson, I've shook hands with her, and she knows who I am, but she doesn't really have any desire to talk about any things I do. But even she will include in the documents about her just how spiritual she was. She was a spiritual woman, but also very much a mystic, because she believed she could communicate with God, the divine, believed that she had prophecies. Some people have tried to relegate that to a head injury when she was young, maybe.
Would you like to talk a little? And just in case people are just joining us, we are talking about Harriet Tubman, the wonderful, courageous abolitionist and general, as we should call her, I suppose.
Yeah, General Tubman.
The General Tubman, who brought hundreds and hundreds of freedom seekers to safe places. But yes, talk about that head injury. That's astonishing that she even survived it.
Yeah, so according to all accounts, very accurately, when she was late teens, she was in town, allowed to go into town to run an errand as an enslaved woman, and there was an overseer trying to apprehend an escaped young freedom seeker male, and he tried to enlist her to help apprehend him, and she refused. And at one point in the struggle, the overseer threw a metal weight towards the young man to try to immobilize him, and hit her in the head and knocked her unconscious. She was unconscious for days. She was in and out of head trauma for weeks. They assumed she would probably die, actually. And so no one really knows. She was already a very religious and spiritual woman at that point, but it is debated that right around then is when she started to have very heavy psychic visions. And when I say psychic visions, meaning that she knew, is documented by the people that traveled with her, that somehow she would go into these, like fits of sleep and awake again. Maybe it was narcolepsy. They don't really know, but she would come out of some of these states and say, we can't go any farther this way. There's an ambush waiting. We have to go a different route. And it would become to found out later that she was aware that ended up being true. So she also, was one who used hands-on healing, incantations, and to put over somebody to help motivate them. And she utilized a little bit. She is the prototypical conjure woman of the African American mysticism. She drew upon African mysticism because her grandmother was from Ghana. Her grandmother's name was Modesty, was a Ghana woman, meaning she was an Ashanti tribe. And so she was aware of African traditions, African mysticism, but yet was so devoutly religious, specifically about the Old Testament within the Bible, all about, the Exodus and fighting Pharaoh. So all, the allegory within there, she drew from as well. And so she is the prototypical, used roots, mysticism, the Bible, African traditions to just be this own personal dogma and formula for her to inspire others around. And it gave a lot of people, according to all accounts, the courage to continue when it would seem so dire and being pursued and everyone's hungry or wet or malnourished, that somehow she just knew, and she just had this sort of faith and the sort of mysticism that just got everybody believing in her. And that's just what it took to make it multiple times that she went back and forth.
That kind of a woman back then, what would they have in their own society, in their own community, in the enslaved communities? How would she have been looked upon by other people?
Well, when it became the mystical side of her, she was definitely referred to as a conjure woman,
okay.
Root woman. Those would be the two terms, or just that was just the thing. It was just she wasn't the only one like that. Like another person within there is Sojourner Truth, another unique Black woman who was enslaved and became free, escaped, and then became an abolitionist in the North. Sojourner Truth, she also drew upon many different religions. It's whatever was necessary in order to survive, to be inspired. And so, but the terminology at the time was conjure woman. But that also was not exactly a celebrated term for some people, because she never really, Harriet Tubman never called herself a conjure woman. This was all after the fact that, some of these terminologies began to be applied to her. It was just, for her, was pragmatism. It was just her way of life. It's just how she was. And I don't really, so that was pretty much the term. Root woman, conjure woman.
Have you heard of Rose Fortune on the East Coast here in Halifax? Yeah. Again, such strong women. Isn't that interesting? That we hear of these strong, amazing women who led so many to safety. Something
Yes.
for a woman. You didn't tell me again about your Nigeria connection. How did you come to that?
Drumming. Once again, it was simply because of once I was now being invited to drum for a few of the different African traditional religions that were not only just here in Southern Ontario, specifically in Toronto, but also in Buffalo, and then into New York City, eventually into New Orleans. And it just became, people had Rolodexes back then, and information was like, there's a group of guys, they're really good, they have the drums, they know how to play them, so people would, if they wanted to have certain ceremonies, I guess must have fell under right in this window of generations of where there were drummers in certain locations that never ever required me or any of my guys to be a part of it, but there were others that were lacking, and so we just filled that gap. And it just became this sort of like one path after another, where I'd run into another person, and eventually ran into people that are from the Yoruba region of Nigeria. And again, simply because of my now eventually, when you become so close with some of these traditions, there is drumming required behind another door, so to speak, where there's initiatory mysteries happening, where there's initiations or passage rites. And there's one thing if it's open, but there's another attribute to be behind that door, so to speak. So eventually I chose to be initiated when it was offered to me into a couple of these. And that's the same way with Ifa. So the religion out of Nigeria is called Ifa. And so same thing, same reason. It was simply because of my ability to drum that was required or invited in. And so that's, it's always been my purpose in these traditions was to help provide sacraments and to provide the music. And so that's how it's always been for me.
Did you go to Ghana while you were in Africa?
No, I've never been to Ghana, not yet.
Is there any record there of modesty and Harriet Tubman and her ancestry?
Absolutely. In fact, artisans in Ghana actually carve out beautiful plaques and statues honoring Harriet Tubman. And in the year 2000, at the millennium as it was flipping over, the royal family of Ghana did a ceremony to, install, meaning there's a stool with her name on it in this hall of queen mothers. So they posthumously made her a queen mother. Never happened before. So she's venerated in not only in Ghana specifically, but in many other little parts of the continent where she represents almost like a folk saint attribute, because she possesses all the qualities of why a person like me would be, now maybe if I wasn't living here in St. Catharines at the very intersection where her track of the Underground Railroad ended, I might not be so, inclined to be devoted to what she represents, but it just happens to be that way. And so if a guy from Scotland who grew up in Canada will dedicate his home and a great deal of my public work to her legacy, that shows just how unique of a human she is, and just the qualities that she possesses. Because you have to remember, she was born enslaved and was abused and tortured on a level that is very hard to get into details wise, the most horrendous things that you can imagine. Yeah. And yet all by the hands of white people. And yet shortly after her first escape, within a couple of years, her closest confidants, her closest trusted people, and people that she trusted her life with were now white people, but they were the people that were trying to help. So that kind of an arc of a arc in life to me is fascinating, because her capacity to understand and to just transform based on what was necessary is unique, and how she enveloped and had an inclusive circle eventually throughout the whole Civil War era.
When did she return to live in the United States?
Right around the beginning of the Civil War. That's when she left St. Catharines for the last time, and she'd already had her property in Auburn, New York, a few hours from here. Yep. And in New York State. And once she situated her family there, because it was far enough north, and they were fairly secure at that point, because she was living in St. Catharines with her family for nearly 15 years. So it's not like she was just, that movie that came out about her a couple of years ago. The only time they showed St. Catharines was really literally 18 seconds of her making a pie and having a psychic vision, and it said St. Catharines. She lived here for 15 years. But regardless, once the Civil War started, she was already, sought after to be a unique spy runner, because she knew the trails. She'd been evading capture for over a decade. And, everybody that was in the regions that were still under slavery or were now the free soldiers, black soldiers, they respected her. They knew who she was. She was a folk hero. So she became a spy, a nurse, because of her unique ability to heal and understanding of healing. It was, again, pragmatic on the trails of the Underground Railroad. There is no other way to heal a person. So she became renowned as a nurse in the Civil War too.
What do you know, and it's recently I've just discovered more about the role that Tuscarora played in the Underground Railroad with her?
Yes, so many Native American tribes, especially in the Northeast, so any parts of Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Western New York, wherever the Native American nations there were, they almost inevitably always were of an asset and a place for solace for the freedom seekers. Much like the Quakers. That's the only reason the Quakers were so renowned for being a part of the Underground Railroad, is they lived communally, and they lived on giant steads of properties that had multiple homes, meaning hundreds of acres. And so most freedom seekers, when they were escaping the South, they didn't have a lot of time to rest. It was, you slept during the day, or you hid during the day. You traveled at night, through swamp, marsh, snake infested, bug infested, whatever it is. It's sometimes cold as well. But once they got to the Northeast, where the Quakers and the Native American populations were, they could rest for sometimes up to a couple of weeks and be fed and have some sort of like, moment to just catch their breath. And so, yes, the Tuscarora, being uniquely situated over where Lewiston is, always gave them solace. Lewiston is renowned in any abolitionist Underground Railroad circles for historians, and I love it over in Lewiston because they are famous for it. They had their great
borders to open to go to visit the Niagara Falls Underground Museum there. It's a wonderful museum.
Yeah, and in Lewiston, right on the waterfront, they have a statue built of a man named Josiah Tryon.
Yes.
Who was a minister at the Presbyterian Church in Lewiston, and for the better part of 20-something years, every single night he went to the village cemetery, which had a code name, Marble Orchard. So all the way to Virginia, they knew that if you got to that particular place called the Marble Orchard, someone would come in at night, and he did it every single day. And if you were an escapee hiding there, he brought you to his house, gave you a few days, and then he rowed them across the Niagara River. It's a little less currenty there to the Canadian side, and they'd walk here to St. Catharines. And so there's a statuary built to him there. And so Lewiston, whether it was the settlers there or the Native American nation, Lewiston is renowned for the fact that they never, ever betrayed their code of helping escaped slaves. It's a beautiful legacy.
Cataract House, the bridge. Yeah, very, very moving. So if you were to, you've dedicated so much of your life to, what do you think came first, your music and your belief, or did she pull you in? Did she find you, or did you find her?
Well, I was already, like I said, immersed in a great deal of the modern witchcraft at the time, and it was eventually as I became a drummer for the Voodoo Spiritual Temple in New Orleans, and under Priestess Miriam, a renowned, iconic Black woman in the city who's had her temple for 35 years. And so I was really enamored, and I've still served that temple for 21 years now. And so she's an incredible woman, Miriam. She's in her 70s, but she is a unique spiritual lady. And so once I started to drum for them and became a member of the temple, they used to present a lot, at various events and conferences, and I would meet them wherever it was, do my part, go down there, help paint, sweep the floors, do whatever I had to do to really, get immersed into that particular family. And when I was up here in Niagara, I was, I'm always lived very close to that church where Harriet Tubman was a member. And I was saying one night on the phone, what can I do to learn more? I want to learn fast. I want to learn more. I was that guy, right? In my 20s. And it was them that said, why don't you spend some more time focusing while you're home on the voodoo of Niagara? And I said, what voodoo of Niagara? And they said, Harriet Tubman. Doesn't she live right beside you? And I went, oh, okay. Well, I know the church you mean. Okay, yeah, I've seen the plaques there. But this is the year 2000 or 2001, and there was no book, no knowledge of any kind to sort of connect these two things. But Miriam knew, Priestess Miriam of the Voodoo Spiritual Temple, because she's a renowned historic Black woman and knows her culture, and knows her history.
What is the name of that temple again? So we can put
Voodoo Spiritual Temple in New Orleans on 1428 North Rampart Street.
I think Juliet's been there.
Yes, probably. Yeah. And so later that night, I went over to look at the church, and it just dawned on me, there is a connection here to this. But there was not really ever, again, no books had been written to connect conjure rootwork to the Underground Railroad. It literally was something I began to do at that moment. And so every time that I was serving my traditions as a drummer, as a person to help fundraise, whatever it was, and because I was lucky to be in a band called the Dragon Ritual Drummers, and we toured all over the continent at big pagan festivals, some mainstream ones as well, then it just enabled me to start to share this legacy. And so it became this passion, a life's work, so to speak, to connect these dots. And so it was not so much Harriet Tubman at first. I know this sounds crazy and mystic, but the BME Church, the British Methodist Episcopalian Church that she was a member of, there was an empty lot at the time, which is now the police station. And there were people at one point buried back there, and they know for a fact that there were some bodies that were left behind during some of the, time, as well as there are still some right now across the street from there behind what used to be the Zion Baptist Church. So nothing can be built there. So it was those spirits, because I lived literally across the street. I don't live too far from there now, but it was those spirits that sort of, in our work of voodoo and traditions, you remember those spirits, you give them sustenance, you give them dignity of thought, and produce a monument for them, and start to work. And it was them, those types of spirits, that brought me, and then to Harriet Tubman inevitably. And so then it's been this sort of work ever since.
If you could meet Harriet Tubman, what on earth would you say? Or I'll just say, not what on earth, what would you say?
I don't know what I would say. And I've obviously thought about this a great deal, because especially when I'm around people that are descended from her family. And I don't know what she would even say if she saw me and knew everything. Probably just, what any older wise woman would probably just look and be like, I don't know, what are you doing, and listen, I suppose. I don't know, but if anyone can see, again, I don't really push into a place that's really too taboo, even though the very subject of elevating her like I do to some people is a great deal of controversy, meaning that that's, something that, how dare you? This is the Underground Railroad. This is not something, why are you putting all this nefarious sorcery and wicked bad voodoo magic on it? But that's not the case. It's just, and when we elevate somebody or illuminate them, as we say in our traditions, that ultimately means that we are holding them up in such great esteem as an example for all of us to hopefully possess those attributes. So not only was she so courageous, the thing that makes her so unique wasn't, there's all elements of her life, how she was born and raised, what she had to endure, but it wasn't just so much as she escaped. It's the fact that she went back many times.
So many times.
And that is the devotion and the warrior aspect, the spiritual warrior. And that is the ultimate courage that is, we can only hope to possess, any of us.
Only hope to. It's astonishing. Would you like to talk about your band, and are they fellow Tubman aficionados like yourself?
Well, I don't know about aficionados, but very lucky that, the Dragon Ritual Drummer is definitely, it's a big part of our identity, because when we go places to perform, which is mostly, for the most part, they're pagan or voodoo oriented conferences and festivals, predominantly in America. But we play a lot of mainstream, the Jazz Festival now a couple of years, folk arts festivals. We used to play a lot. Mutati Drum Festival in Toronto, a lot of world music events we've played as well. So whenever we perform, we usually are able to also do a workshop of some sort. And our workshop becomes this sort of telling the stories of what the Underground Railroad is. And again, it's not too hard, because the Underground Railroad was a tapestry of not just people escaping slavery, but the multiple religions and cultures that helped make it what it was. It was a unique fraternity of men, women, different religions, different classes, different countries,
Black and white,
all that, getting them all away from enslavement, so that it provides a unique paradigm for cooperation amongst activism. And so there's that. And then also, just the connection of that it is a part of the African traditional religious line. And because when we also at some of these events sometimes teach what we call the order of service, which is the drum calls and stories of the Voodoo Spiritual Temple in New Orleans, there's a connection there. So we can tell the stories of Harriet Tubman, John Brown, who was the white abolitionist, all the different people that contributed to sacred rhythms that come from New Orleans. And so it's a way for us to sort of, make many bridges to sort of celebrate that, yes, there are some issues in this continent, obviously. I can detect from your accent, like me, we were not born here. We live here now, but, so the history is easy to see when you're a foreigner, to recognize some things need to be recognized. Some things need to be rectified. And, some types of activism are best left to others. For me and my group, we have picked, or just been lucky enough to be blessed to be, again, illuminated our own way of this unique paradigm of cooperation in the 1800s to fight tyranny and slavery, that is an inspiration of all the different people it took to make that work, and how that is very applicable to today.
And it's a belief for you. It's a belief for you that here's this subject that, because we're close to this subject right now from what you just said, let's touch on it, however sensitive it is, cultural appropriation. I know you've come right up against it.
Cultural appropriation, for some people, when 20 years of my public work, was never an issue. All the traditions I belong to are people that are renowned people of color, whether they're African American, Puerto Rican, Cuban. Those are the worlds I live in. And again, those traditions, they're not really American in the first place. Cultural appropriation doesn't exist. That's not even a concept in the minds of an African from the Yoruba region. They want people of different nationalities from around the world to glorify their elevated beings. don't want anyone to pretend to be something that they're not, but they feel the religion is dignified enough to be inclusive. And the same in the Caribbean. Many of the priests and priestesses are people that may be Puerto Rican, but that's also a very blended society. I've met a lot of Cubans and Puerto Ricans that are whiter than me, and I was born in Scotland. So, it's about culture. And so in America, yeah, recently there's been issues of what culture appropriation is. I have totally always been somebody in my communities and traditions pointing it out with great ease as to who the perpetrators are. For me, there was a blip of the radar when my book came out from mostly part of California that was very influential in that sort of woke culture. But that didn't last long, because when people of my tradition spoke up and said, don't you know who this person is? No. Did you read the liner notes? Did you see who helped them write the book?
Yeah.
Essentially just shut up. And but that's unfortunately the woke movement doesn't like to listen to the people they say they speak over. So it became contentious. And after a while, unfortunately, it wasn't about cultural appropriation for me. It was just trying to brand me all manner of other things, which, all it did was make me more popular in some regards, because people were like, wow, they're really trying to take you out the equation for what? So can't really cultural appropriate I'm immersed in the religions. And so, I'm a drummer. That's essentially to the level of what I am. And then the Underground Railroad is a movement that if someone's going to write a book about history about it, especially a specific history that nobody else would get published, that's not appropriation. That's history. That's just reality. So I actually don't ever have any issues with that. It was very.
When you're singing, do you sing in dialect?
Well, if we're singing African Yoruba words, sometimes I'm reiterating things that are not English. Yes, but. When we're performing with the Dragon Ritual drummers, if I'm singing some of the songs from New Orleans, it's basically Creole words I'm saying.
Okay.
Unless we're also celebrating, we do a play song dedicated to Shango, who's an Orisha, which is an elevated being from Yoruba land. Yeah, I do the invocation to honor him in Yoruba, but I don't speak the language at all in any way, shape, or form that resembles fluent. It's a very complicated language, but yeah.
I don't know if this is even something you can truly answer. I'm sure I think you can. I mean, obviously, I think you got it in your soul. But how does all this total reverence and honoring and illuminating of this incredibly courageous woman, Harriet Tubman, and what she stood for, how does that come through you into your music?
Well, for the last at least 15 years, almost everything I do is influenced to some degree either by my reverence and inspiration drawn from what Harriet Tubman and her freedom seekers that were also integral in helping her inner circle. These are all unique people that work together, and also this sort of inspiration I draw from whether it's the Voodoo Spiritual Temple, and the elevated beings from there, or from a Yoruba land, Nigeria, and also, I'm Scottish. I wear a kilt sometimes. I'm a big part of my Scottish culture, and no one likes it more than some of the Yoruba crowd. When I show up something traditional, sometimes they want you to wear a specific white or something. Once in a while, I come in the kilt, and they love it. They're like, "Oh yes, brave hearts." They just all love it and think it's funny, and they love it though because So I'm just a product of whatever it is. I don't live a normal life, that's for sure, but I have to sometimes stop and go, how am I making this decision in life based on drawing from these things, huh? Okay.
You don't play the bagpipes?
I don't play the bagpipes all very well. I've got chanters and I play a lot of different instruments, but I have not mastered the bagpipes, unfortunately.
Yeah, they make me weep, bagpipes. And I also feel with the drums, and maybe you can explain it for me, something happens when I hear drums. It's almost something on a cellular level for me. I can't explain it, but it feels deep as something totally cellular. What is that?
Yeah, it's primordial for human beings, right? It is the oldest instrument. Every culture in the world has a form of traditional drum, whether you're Inuit in the Arctic, whether you're anywhere in Asia, Indonesia, Africa, all over Europe, the Americas here, every single culture has a tradition of the drum. And so it's very primal. It connects to us on that level. And it's also familiar because we spend 9 months inside the womb and all we hear is chunka, 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 heartbeat and fluids. And one of the things I learned very early on as a ritual drummer was, especially with the voodoo traditions, was that when babies were freshly born, some of the temple sisters would show up with the baby a day old to the ceremony where we're going to have thrashing drums, and how, the baby might have been crying a little bit at first. And as soon as the drumming started, sound asleep. And I've seen it so many times, and every ritual drummer has seen that. If you're in the traditions I'm in, we all agree, oh yeah, I've seen that too, where someone brings the baby and literally there's a ceremony happening, and that fresh baby or young child is sleeping on the temple floor, bundled up while the drums are going. It speaks to a level of us that is primal. Totally. And it's connected to us. It's part of our soul.
I think you talk about that a bit when you talk about alchemy. I think it's alchemy you talk about in your book. Is it alchemy? And I wondered if that was the same sense of the getting into that cellular level, as you said. I mean, it's the music that seems to speak to, I'm not sure what comes first with you. I still don't know whether it's your incredible belief or if it's the music coming out of that moves me so much. Do you feel more at home in the spirit world or in the music world?
They're inseparable for me. Even when I was younger, I was in, playing guitars and drum kits and things in rock and roll bands and things like that. But I was still already kind of like now involved in witchcraft, the pagan traditions. And so a great majority of my life, the two things have been inseparable, where they're, that, and any musician will tell you, they may not even be mystical, but any musician who's a composer, at least, there's something unique about being in a group of musicians when you're jamming and a sudden a song arrives and there's a sense, and every musician knows it. There's a sense of creativity and something that comes from the, and even musicians throughout the ages who might not have been religious or might not be mystical have written songs about what the muse is, or that sort of visit. What is that? And that's just, it's the inspiration that drives creativity and to explore
where it comes from, and there it is.
Yeah, how does it happen? So you never really know. But music, especially coming out of New Orleans, like Louisiana is so unique in that it is truly kind of the birthplace of all modern pop culture. Like, so in New Orleans, famously Congo Square is where, it was like basically a farmer's market in the 1800s that, the enslaved, because people forget, slaves still had to grow their own food. They weren't being fed. They had to grow their own food while being enslaved and worked, nearly 20 hours a day. So that was the one day Sunday during the way the Catholic, colonizers and slavers worked. Sunday was the free day to go to the farmer market, exchange food, things of this nature. So there was the enslaved, free people of color, the indentured servants of mostly Irish culture, some German as well, that were building the canals, and a little bit of the Native American population kind of came around that place every Sunday. And so famously, that's where the jam started, because the drummers were all there. And that was the only time they could drum and dance and do these sort of famous dances, communicate, the Africans I'm speaking of. But on the other side of the square were these Irish people with fiddles. And it's just, to me, one of the most unique things that despite all of the horrendous nature of what was going on in America through, colonization and eradicating and enslavement, somehow somebody, we don't know who it was, whether it was a fiddler or a drummer, walked up, and somehow the music of a musician, they played together. And that is where jazz was born. Jazz was born in New Orleans. That's why there's plaques to it there. And jazz gives birth to rhythm and blues. And then that rhythm and blues influences the bluegrass. And that's now just, again, it's that combination of the banjo, which is an African instrument, the fiddle. And weirdly enough, even in Louisiana, because of a German, population of Catholic Germans that were kind of kicked out and came into Louisiana, brought the accordion. And yet again, you've got the African rhythms with the accordion, meanwhile, which was out in the swamps, and in the city, you've got the African rhythms with the fiddle. And these are the basis of not only Zydeco, but jazz. And that now becomes the foundations of rock and roll. So all the way through America, while it was segregated, it was always musicians who bridged those worlds. When certain black and white musicians weren't supposed to jam, or it was considered, or to perform on large stages, it's always been that musicians always pushed the envelope to share together. And so That's the beautiful legacy of New Orleans, is that it's the birthplace. And now, I mean, everywhere in the world, rock and roll is the foundation of all pop culture. And yet it would only have happened, it could only happen based on all the, turn of events that enabled that. Enslaved African drums and the indentured servitude's fiddle of the European combining to make what became.
All right, so close, two more questions.
Sure.
What do you think the biggest lesson is you've learned from Harriet Tubman?
Perseverance. That no matter how hard something may seem and how far away the destination might be, that we can make it, and not only make it, but find a way to draw from the other side. And we can call that whatever we want. That can be our ancestors, that can be a saint, that can be God, it can be anything. But if you draw upon something, pull some power, some inspiration from something else, and survive and persevere, no matter how hard the obstacles are. If there's an obstacle, you find a way around it. You outsmart it. You figure out a way above it, below it, over it, and you get to it. And that is what it is, as well as the courage to continue to illuminate. That's one of the things. She continued to go back, and then she continued to promote. When the Underground Railroad was over and the Civil War was over, she went on to champion women's rights.
Mm-hmm.
Women's rights for voting. Like, this woman never stopped.
No, she was
Queen Victoria sent her a shawl and a medal and money before the American government ever gave her money for her pension for Civil War.
And you have that picture in the book with her wearing in your book, wearing that
famous photo of her right shortly before she died.
We'll put it on the chat here. Just remind people of your wonderful book. And then my last question: your amazing prickly pears.
Oh, prickly pears.
How are they doing?
Great. I'll say that's another thing. African traditional religions, specifically the Underground Railroad culture, taught me a lot about gardening. Gardening certain things that were indigenous and that provided food and magic. And so certain plants have a unique ability to provide magical qualities as well as sustenance. So prickly pears, I never had them before. I just got them recently from someone's garden in the region. That's a natural garden of them because they're indigenous here. There's not very many places left. They broke some off, gave them to me, and they flowered, and supposedly they're going to make a fruit. So yes, I've been really into the cactus lately. I've got a few of them growing now.
Well, I'm gonna say thank you so very much, and I'm gonna hand back to Juliet. But it's been a total pleasure, and I feel like I've been moved so much by your book and by talking to you. I've learned a great deal. Thank you so.
Oh, I appreciate it very, very much. It really means a lot to me, and thank you so much. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Hang around backstage. We'll bring you back in to have a little chat. Just hold on. Now I'm going to hand back to Juliet. Thanks, everyone.
Wow. Thanks so much, Witchdoctor Utu and Babs, for such a great voodoo session and just learning about the culture of New Orleans and Niagara and the Underground Railroad. Just fascinating. So much to learn. And we will post your book again, Witchdoctor Utu, so people can order a copy of that. We're going to, you talked about Congo Square, and I was actually there with Peter and my family back in 2019, April 2019, before the pandemic, and we got to visit Congo Square and a lot of the places you talked about. And here's a video from my iPhone of Congo Square. So I hope you had a chance to read all of that on the screen. And if you didn't, you can always go back and click pause, because all of our shows and sessions do stay up for a little while. So do enjoy the other sessions as well while you're surfing around our channels. And let's check out some drumming with the Dragon Ritual drummers led by Witchdoctor Utu. This is their track called Bamboola. Once again, that was Witchdoctor Utu and the Dragon Ritual Drummers with their track Bamboola. Hope you enjoyed. And before I leave you, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our upcoming events. They're online, we're being safe, but you can still do watch parties and hang out with your friends, because as things are opening up, I know that you're allowed to have more people gather in your home. So why not do Mardi Gras this year at home, on your property, dance around in the garden, on your porch, wherever you like to, get dressed up. We have a mask making workshop with Alexa you can check out and make your own mask. We're going to be posting a video on how you can make a regular umbrella way more fun. We've got a second line session coming up as well. So lots of ways to enjoy at home. And we have experience boxes from 13th Street and Comfort Kitchen and some of our other partners that'll be announced on our website. An experience box is bringing the experience home. So with 13th Street, you get wine and goodies. I know there's olives and oysters and lots of crackers and lots of fun stuff. And then also a tutored wine tasting with their gorgeous wines. And then, of course, we throw in the Mardi Gras masks, the beads, and all the fun stuff as well. It's all fun. So that's all on our website, NiagaraJazzFestival.com. And then with Comfort Kitchen, you've got a Cajun meal. And oh, their famous bread pudding for dessert is one of the options as well. So lots of tasty treats. Niagara's Online Summer Mardi Gras, it's July 24th. That's a Saturday. Good news is you can also tune in afterwards, so the stream will stay live for a while. So if you already have plans on the 24th, because I know those calendars are getting booked up, host a watch party on another day, and you can tune in as well. There will also be sessions and culinary and cocktail demos and lots of great stuff. So, and of course, I didn't even mention the artists. Oh my goodness, without the artists, there'd be nothing. The artists, we've got Lance Anderson, we've got the Heavyweights Brass Band, we've got Vegas Cola, Dr. Bryce and his Jazz Ambassadors, and they're coming live to us from New Orleans. And the Dragon Ritual Drummers, of course. And I know I'm forgetting one right now. No, I think I did. I think I listed them all. So do tune in to Niagara's Online Summer Mardi Gras. And then the weekend after that, we have the Emancipation Day weekend, and that's in partnership with the First Ontario Performing Arts Centre, supported by the City of St. Catharines and led by Matter of Black and Black-owned 905. That's a 4-day event. Again, we're doing it all online to stay nice and safe, but you can, again, do the picnic, the Emancipation Day picnic at home, get takeout from the local restaurant partners. So that'll all be on our website as well, and also on the City of St. Catharines website, which will direct all the traffic there as well. So that's Emancipation Day weekend, July 29th to August 1st. Okay, so I think I've said enough for this evening. Please stay safe, stay cool, hydrate, and we will catch you next time. Oh, before I leave, there are some shows that I need to mention. Coming this Sunday, July 4th, Twilight Jazz series featuring the Jillian Mendez Trio, and her show is Soulful Summer, and she has such a soulful voice. You don't want to miss that show. 7 p.m. until 8:30 p.m. But again, you can watch it anytime afterward as well. Tickets available on our website, NiagaraJazzFestival.com. And then we have our masterclass, and that is with the King of Treme, Shannon Powell, live from New Orleans. You can be a hobbyist, a professional musician, or even just curious. So please tune in. You need to sign up in advance, but that is completely free. And for yourselves or anyone you know who's 23 or under, it's today or the last 2 days to get in the submissions for the Jazz for the Ages Youth Competition, 12 and under, 13 to 17, 18 to 23. And they will be judged just by sending in a YouTube link by professional judges. And then the selection will be made by July 15th. And then we will announce the finalists, who will then come out for the finals on August 29th at a secret location just with their family members. And that will be live streamed, and they'll do 2 contrasting pieces. And then we will have winners chosen from those finalists. All of the finalists get cash prizes. Not that that should be the reason to submit, but it's a nice perk. And so do all of the winners as well. So thanks to all of our sponsors and partners for helping us keep everybody happy, and even the kids. So that's it for me. Have a great night. Stay safe, stay cool, and we'll see you next time.